Open top, ball still in play. Oh, what a goal! What a magnificent, absolutely stupendous strike from Kevin Kurani. Borovic through to Raul. Lovely chip by Raul. 4-1 Schalke.
Blau und weiß ein Leben lang. Hallo meine Leute, wie geht's? Willkommen zum das einzige Schalke Podcast auf Englisch. That's right folks, officially the world's only English Schalke podcast worldwide. This is episode 95 of SchalkeMerica. I'm your host Richard Carmen. Schalke fans are some of the greatest fans in the world, many of whom speak English. This pod aims to bring you the latest from the Royal Blues, talk to the English-speaking fans of the club, get their point of view across, and bring you game highlights. As always, joining me on the show is co-host Jack Mangan. Jack, how are we doing this evening?
Aren't you so pleased that football came back so that we could all be subjected to this?
Yes and no. I'm happy football's back. Believe me, I'm really happy it's back, but I'm not so happy that Schalke is back.
Yeah, that's been the struggle recently for sure. I expected to be having a little bit better of a time than I've been having the last month or so.
Yeah, and it hasn't gotten any better, has it? Every time we think it's going to be good, putting the youngsters in against Leverkusen, then they didn't do well. The following match, let's before we get into that, the rundown for tonight's podcast. We're going to talk Wolfsburg because we have to, and then we're going to get into a little bit of Clemens Tonnies and the Ultras, and then even some listener question and answers. But let's get right into the lineups of this game. We have to get into it. So for this one, starting in for the Wolfsburg, in goal, obviously Casteels is in goal. They had a back four of Mbabu, Pongracic, Brooks, Roussillon, midfield of Stefan, Schlager, Arnold, and Brekalo, and up top, of course, the big men of Ginczek and Weghorst. Fairly standard lineup for Wolfsburg. But looking at our lineup, in goal, obviously Alexander Nubel, a back four of John-Joe Kenny, Ozan Kabak, Bastiano Chipka, and Juan Miranda, a midfield of Caligiuri, McKinney, Schoff, and Mercan making his start. And then up top, you had Matando and Gregorich. So off the bat, what were your thoughts on the lineups? And more importantly, our lineup, because the last few games we had seen that we had going with the youngsters, but this seems to go a little bit back to his bread and butter, I guess.
I think it's just a matter of fixture congestion and having to rotate the squad a little bit, because we saw some of those guys play a couple matches in a row, including the midweek games, because it was an English Schalke, and you had Boujalev, Katushu, Bosdoan playing a couple times within a matter of days. So I'm not surprised that Mercan slots in, or that you see Gregorich back in the starting lineup, Caligiuri, these kind of people. Honestly, pretty much what I expected, given who's available and the rotation needs.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure how this was going to turn out. I know before the game they were talking about, I think Kevin Hatcher was on the call, and they were saying how Wolfsburg really struggled the last match. I think they played against was it Leverkusen they played? Whoever they played, they didn't play that well. They didn't show up at all, and so I was wondering if maybe some of that would rub off in this game, but not so much. We kind of took a beating in this one, Jack. Let's get to the goals. So the goal scoring started early with in the 50s. Well, not early, but early second half, I should say. Weghorst gets the opener for Wolfsburg, followed just 2 minutes later by Mbabu. Made it 2-0 right there. Our man would come into the pitch at the 65th minute. An early entrance for Ahmed Katucu would not matter. In the 69th minute, João Victor would get a third goal for Wolfsburg. Robbie Matando in the 70th would make it 4-1, at that point, and that's how it would end. And the Weghorst had a goal in the 16th minute. There's so many goals by Wolfsburg, I can't keep track. Poor performance.
Thank goodness for Robbie Matando, so that we were spared the Schalke 04 jokes once again. Because that seems to be happening more frequently than typically we have to endure those jokes. But those jokes are deserved, because we've been bad. And yeah. I mean, to be honest, this result isn't particularly surprising. We're going up against a Wolfsburg team that has been very solid all season, right on the precipice of the European places now, what we were kind of hoping to be, but they've just been playing better down the stretch. And especially when you see how we performed against teams that you would typically expect us to beat, in Düsseldorf, Union Berlin, those kind of teams. It's not surprising to see that Wolfsburg came in here and pretty much had their way with us. It would be pretty much right from the beginning too. Within the first 5, 6, 7 minutes, they had some decent chances. Some of those were more long-range efforts early on, so not exactly like high percentage chances, but you could see that there were some breakdowns forming, and there's just a possession disparity right off the top too. And then Weghorst, who's been, you have to give it to him. He's been a good signing for Wolfsburg ultimately. Yeah. Not somebody that I was particularly familiar with prior to them bringing him in, but he's had, he's been good for him. He's been good this season. And, the first goal is, I think, maybe the best one in terms of our defensive showing of the four. Ultimately, just kind of some confusion in the box, and Weghorst gets to it first and has a really nice, clever turn and ultimately fires near post. So you could criticize Ochipka potentially for kind of ball watching once that broken play kind of began. I think he maybe had an opportunity to jump in there and get to that ball before Weghorst, but he didn't really make the effort. Second goal, I believe that was Weghorst again. Just actually, I don't even recall at this point. There's too many of them, but I mean, one of them was it was a through ball through the back line, like Miranda and Ochipka, like neither of them got to it. I mean, it was almost like there was 3 defenders on one at that point. It was way too easy. João Victor's goal, Alexander Nubel, everyone's favorite goalkeeper, the guy that's so much better than Marcus Schubert. Why are they playing Marcus Schubert? Alexander Nubel's going to Bayern. Whatever. He completely misjudges the flight of that ball. If you watch that, he starts running directly straight out from his goalkeeper line and then has to cut left at the last minute to even get there. That results in him not really clearing the ball the way he needs to. He punches it directly at João Victor, who then fires into the open side of that net that he just left vacant by rushing out. Another goalkeeper mistake for Alexander Nubel. This guy, I'm telling you, this guy is not that good. He may be one day. I mean, I'm not to say that he's not without promise, but once again, the people that continuously try to make the case that he's so much better than Schubert, I just don't think they're watching, because he makes mistakes all the time too.
You've brought it up many times on this podcast that there's nothing really separating these two players, Schubert and Nubel. They're fairly similar guys. Neither guy really stands out more than the other. Before you would say Nubel's at least distribution was better than Schubert, but he hasn't shown it. He's had constant turnovers or kicking out of bounds lately. So right now they're basically the same player, and it's both of them are making mistakes. They're both young, and there's no answers really. And I hate to jump into the news real quick, but Schalke Daily is reporting that Schalke are going to be loaning out Marcus Schubert next year to get more game time experience. I mean, I guess game time at Schalke doesn't count either. So I mean, it makes sense why they're doing it, because he needs to go to a smaller league, the Zweite Bundesliga or somewhere else, and get some pitch time like he was doing before. But you need to bring in a veteran. I know they're looking at guys like Sven Ulreich, and maybe Fireman and some other guys. But you hit the nail on the head. It's Nubel and Schubert. They're the same. One's not doing better than the other. And I'm not trying to claim that Schubert is some fantastic goalkeeper, but the disparity between these people is not as large as some people would have you believe. It just is what it is. So yet another goalkeeping mistake that we suffer from. The other goal I was thinking of was actually Mbappé, who scored it off the rebound. Yeah. Another situation where you could argue there was some ball watching taking place. I think it may have been Caligiuri at that point who stopped running and kind of like watched the ball after the shot went away. And if he had continued that and tried to get in front of somebody, I think he could have beaten Mbappé to that ball on the rebound potentially. So, I mean, the same thing we've been seeing. Just once the defensive breakdowns start, the interest in really finishing plays and playing to the whistle, so to speak, seems to decline in this team. And that's what compounds some of these performances where you start getting the effort just drops a little bit. The effort to get to those 50-50 balls. And in a game like this where there's a lot of shots on target and things are coming out and you're getting rebound opportunities, that's not a good habit to have. And we saw it. So like I said, thank goodness for Robbie Notando for stopping the bleeding and at least getting us on the board to avoid the 0-4. Katuchu with the assist. Nice play from him where he dropped deep from the forward position. They had a beautiful flick on to Matando. Shout out Kevin Hatchard, who you mentioned was on the call for dropping the hashtag Free Katuchu. Yes, sir.
Yes, that may have been Phil Bonney was saying that he did it at some point this season. If I missed it, I can't believe I would have missed it. I don't recall that, but
yeah,
I know we've had James Thurgood and now Kevin Hatchard
yeah.
have joined the movement, so we appreciate that for sure. And nice to see him at least get a decent cameo in this match if he wasn't gonna start because of the fixture congestion recently.
All we need now is Huntingstein to drop the hashtag now, right?
Yeah, exactly, man.
So the loss brings us. We really didn't move anywhere in the table. We're sitting in 11th place, 9 points above the drop. So there's no worries. The one game left. I think it's one game left, right? I lose track at this point. Yeah, we're sitting 39 points, 1 point ahead of Union Berlin at the moment. Wolfsburg with that win got themselves back to European spot. It was a big game for them. It was about how poor Schalke is, but this meant something to Wolfsburg, and it showed in that game because they're trying to get into Europe and obviously more money for them. And now they're sitting in sixth place on 49 points. Just I think goal differential ahead of Hoffenheim. I mean, the top five are really way ahead of everybody else. I mean, Wolfsburg's at 49 points. In fifth place is Bayer at 60 points, 11 points ahead of them. And then, obviously 30 points ahead of Wolfsburg is Bayern. So it's just the top five are just ridiculously much better than everybody else. And Wolfsburg beat us by 3 goals. So how bad does that make it sound, Yeah. It's just abysmal to watch right now. And I know all the fans feel the same way. And, it kind of leads me into where I want to go next with this because I really don't want to spend too much time in Wolfsburg. I mean, unless you want to, of course.
There are just 2 more things I wanted to talk about on the
please,
back game, first of all, shout out Weston McKennie, who once again I think had a pretty decent performance despite a pretty bad performance of the team in general. I think that's his 3rd game in a row where he was arguably the best player on the pitch for us.
Didn't he go through like 5 players at one point?
Well, yeah, he had that one run in particular where he beat several Wolfsburg defenders, including John Brooks, unfortunately for the American perspective. laid off a ball, may have been to Mercan on the left side, who then fired across to Caligiuri. That was the best chance of the game, I think, for us, and one that Daniel Caligiuri should have finished. I think that would have made it 1-1 at the time as well, which maybe it changes the game. Unlikely, who knows? But poor finish from Caligiuri there. But Weston McKennie doing yeoman's work to set that whole thing up, carrying the ball for more than half the distance, I think, of the pitch. Other thing is Bon Voyage Jean-Jo Kenny, who picked up his 5th yellow card and thus is going to miss the final game of the season due to yellow card accumulation suspension. So that's the last we're going to see of him, assuming we aren't able to retain him, which doesn't look likely. What are your thoughts on his season overall, and how do you feel about him now that we've kind of reached the end of his tenure here?
I liked it. I think he brought a lot of value to the team. Obviously had 2 bangers of goals this season. Unfortunately, it wasn't any more. But he did a lot of good in the season, especially in the beginning of the season when the whole team was doing well. So it makes sense that he would do well. But he was really a catalyst for that. It really gave Caligiuri an opportunity to grow into the season because he struggled, I think, mightily coming into the season. Even though he was given more freedom offensively because he didn't have that defensive responsibility with Kenny back there, but. Overall, I think it paid well for both players to have Kenny back there, and I thought he was solid. I mean, obviously he looked young, he looked raw in some instances, but he looked like a decent player, and I'm sad to see him go because who do you fill that void now? Because didn't I read somewhere that Caligiuri is going now too? End of the season?
Yeah, there was the loan that he was going to sign a contract with Augsburg. I don't know if that's been confirmed yet. I feel like I would have seen that if that had actually taken place. But,
well, that's a rumor at least, yeah. And so I thought he had a good season. What about you?
Yeah, I would have liked to see him maintain the level of performance that he demonstrated earlier on, despite the team tanking as a whole, because it definitely seemed that his form seemed to dip along with that of the side. But, if we're going on the first half, yeah, he was promising. And I think the one thing you can say about him is he was a reliable body for us in a season where we were decimated by injuries. And, he was constantly available for selection. And even, despite mistakes, I think always put in a shift and was always committed to what his role was. Certainly room for growth. And he's definitely had some stinkers, man. He's had some bad games this season. Yeah. But he's somebody whose commitment I don't question, and I think that carries a lot of weight at a club like Schalke. And I'm interested to see what happens with him when he returns to Everton, whether or not he's given an opportunity to rotate into that squad in place of Seamus Coleman, or whether or not he's been put in the shop window as a result of his time here and is going to move on. But overall, I think I'm appreciative of his time here, but it definitely declined kind of and was more disappointing than it looked like it was going to be at the end. Last thing, I know I'm earlier, dude, how bad is Juan Miranda defensively?
I'm glad you brought it up. And I don't remember, someone tweeted this out. I don't know if it was during the game or the day after, but they were saying how, like, trying to talk about his analysis and really maybe you play him in the wrong position. And I wanted to read it and talk about it on the podcast, and I can't find it anywhere. So, but yeah, defensively he looks bad. And I don't know if it was you who brought up the point that maybe he should be like an attacking midfielder or something like that. Maybe he'd do better because he obviously has a skill set to contribute offensively, but defensively, man, in shambles. I mean, one of those goals, he was just lying on his back, like you talked about, and yeah, just it's not getting any better for the kid, no matter how much pitch time he's getting. Barcelona's probably like, Miranda has said he wants to stay at the club for another year at least to fill out the contract. But I mean, man, he needs to get better defensively, or we play him in a different position.
Because when we brought him in, it seemed to me that a lot of people were excited about the prospect of potentially him literally just rotating with Oczipka, because Oczipka is another player like Jonjoe Kenny, just longer serving at this point, who is very much just kind of your workhorse left back that gets so many match minutes.
And maybe Wagner saw something in training that we didn't know about, that he couldn't play defense, and that's why he kept him out for so long.
Who knows, man? It's definitely possible. But I was hoping that we'd be able to give Oczipka some rest, just because we wear that guy down to the nub every season.
It didn't get any better at the end either. Put him at center back.
Where were you even keeping that coffee just now? Where'd you pull that from? It was like a magical coffee shelf.
It's the old stage trick, No.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, so anyway, I just wanted to mention that because that's another guy who, despite expressing an interest in staying at Schalke, who knows if he's ultimately going to do that, or if Barcelona.
Do you want to drink?
Bubbly action, a little seltzer.
That's right.
As a millennial, I very much enjoy spending money on canned water and avocado toast because I value that more than home ownership. So, anyway, yeah. So just a couple loan moves there, and ultimately kind of a mixed bag of results. So, despite what looked like some promising loan policy and transfer policy, yet another season where all those don't seem to quite stick, and you wonder how much of that is just the chaos at the club in general.
For those who are listening live on the show, please feel free to comment during the podcast, send us questions or comments. We'll read them on there. I wonder what your thoughts are on Levant Marcan in the game. How did you think he did? Obviously, it wasn't quite the entrance as Bazduan had the week before, but overall, what would you give Marcan in that game?
I think it was harder to judge him just because we were much more out of that game than we had been in some of the games that Bazduan was a part of, and maybe that was partially because of him. But I think just the difference in possession, everything, it was hard for us to do much of anything, and so I don't think he was able to really put his stamp on the game to the extent that he probably would have been hoping for, because I think he's actually gotten less appearances than probably Bujalov has as well. I think of the crop of young guys, I think he's probably been on the outside looking in more than Katuchu or Bujalov. So, and especially after Bazduan coming in and making the impression that he did, I think a lot of these young guys are very much aware of the fact that the club might be relying on them next season because of the financial difficulties and the low likelihood that we're actually going to be able to freshen the squad up as a result of transfer policy. It could be a big Knappe-Schmidt a year.
Yeah.
So I think he maybe will be slightly disappointed with that, but I think all those guys are still promising, and it maybe is what this club needs to some extent, is the younger guys to kind of show, because they seem to show more commitment sometimes to what Wagner's trying to do. They seem to listen a little bit better and work for it. So,
we'll get to one of those that comment more into the in the question portion of this thing. I do want to give a shout out to since we're on YouTube, give a shout out to Cedric Zalmat. If you don't follow him, if you know German at least. Give him a follow on not only YouTube but also on Twitter. He provides fantastic analysis of games before and after. Definitely give him a follow as a Schalke fan. So shout out to him. So let the transition after that poor game at Wolfsburg. I'm going to share. Oh, before I share the screen, I want to talk a little bit about our chairman. Things have come around with him, and people are growing restless right now. We all know the sickening remarks that Tonnies made last August when and led to his 3-month self hiatus. He came back from that, his hiatus, and nothing came from the club. We thought maybe there'd be a comment by the club, and there really wasn't. He was fairly quiet up until this past weekend when news broke that one of his meat slaughtering plants that he owns had a massive coronavirus outbreak, which is like it went completely against what the German threshold is, according to Angela Merkel. And this has left fans on the brink, so much so that the ultras, and let me go ahead and share this screen, Jack. Our mighty ultras of Gelsenkirchen, they came out and they had some choice words for Mr. Tonnies, and really anybody associated in the supervisory board or in that elk, I guess, or that range. I'm gonna read the first two paragraphs and do some bullet points. This is initially reported, at least to us, that we saw it. Andreas Ernst on Twitter, he puts this out. So the first couple paragraphs, and I'll go into the bullet points. This is all in English. Obviously, you're looking at it in German, but feel free to look at the website. We'll share it again, and feel free to look at it and translate it for your liking. But basically, it says we have been holding back criticism for a long time to avert further headlines and unrest with the club. Where am I? The season will finally come to a close this upcoming weekend, and there's nothing left for us in the sporting sense. Therefore, the time has come now that we would like to comment on the various topics and events of the past weeks and months, really. We can no longer, and we will not leave this disastrous situation surrounding our beloved FC Schalke 04 uncommented. Rarely has our club given a more catastrophic picture than this season, in addition to a sportly desolate second half of the season, which I completely agree with. With just 8 goals and historic series without a win. We're going on, 12 games or something like that without a win. That's something ridiculous. Above all of that, the committees and those responsible for the club make our club look ridiculous every week and seem to have lost all contact with reality of Gelsenkirchen. As unbelievable as this may seem at the moment, the fundamental problems of our club are not only in the field, but the board of directors and the supervisory and honorary councils, and more so also on coming in the last recent past. So really, they took shots at the Council of Honor, the finance of Schalke, the supervisory board, obviously with Clemens Tonnies, and then talking about Schalke values. There really were some very strong, firm comments, Jack, about them, and they ended it all with anyone who does not live Schalke values must leave the club now. Strong words by the ultras, not something we're all feeling really, but this is the first time the ultras have come out and said anything about any of this.
Yeah, strong words there. If you go through and you read the entire statement, it's very difficult to walk away from it finding much to disagree with.
Yeah,
I think it's a sentiment that's shared by a lot of Schalke supporters right now, and even more intensely, of course, by those that are part of the community on the ground over there. More so than you and I over here in the States. I think they're frustrated and they feel betrayed by the people that are supposed to be the stewards and the custodians of their club, who they feel aren't living up to the values that the club proclaims and the values that the fans themselves try to live up to, and they feel betrayed by the people who have allowed the club to get into this financial situation under their watch. It's difficult to blame them. And just the way they handled the whole Clemens Toney situation. Like we said it when the punishment was announced on this podcast, we were laughing at it because we're like, all he's going to do is go away for 3 months, be quiet so everyone forgets about him, and then he's going to slowly slide back in and nothing's going to be said about it. And that's exactly what happened. It was such a non-punishment.
Yeah.
The anti-racism stuff is so important and so crucial to the club's values in general. Especially so right now with the prominence internationally of the Black Lives Matter movement, and in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And so it's even more of a stain than it might otherwise would be on the club, his continued presence. And then this thing, the COVID outbreak and his one of his plants, that's like the other most important thing going on in the world right now besides the Black Lives Matter. These are like the two biggest issues, and he seems to be failing on both of them. And this is a guy that's like in very much a large way like kind of like one of the faces of our club. And yeah, so to the extent that the ultras are saying it's time for you to get out, can you disagree with them? I mean, it's difficult for me too. The club has lost stature. It's not in a good place, and it's been embarrassed by some of these people. And I mean, I don't think it's wild to suggest that a change of leadership in high positions is required to get us back on track.
And I don't remember who it was. Someone in our German-speaking community had tweeted out and saying, really, if those of you who voted for Tonnies to come back, why did you vote for him? And then some people were just being frankly honest, and they're like, look, out of all the candidates, he's actually the only one who had anything that made it seem like worth picking. Looked like nobody else knew what they were talking about. I mean, at least he could talk the talk at least, so that's why he got chosen. But I mean, the fans are completely against him at the moment, and the chance for Tony Raus is growing louder than I've ever heard it under his reign. And it was pretty bad back when the whole just before he stepped out for 3 months with the whole racism row. But this is even worse now. And I mean, and especially the condition that the team is in right now, it just nothing is going well at the moment. And like I said, with nothing being said, especially like shortly after that happened, they had that say no to racism thing, and they still said nothing about it. It's just the fans have had enough, and even if the club was doing well, I still think it would be the fans would be still up in arms about it. And it's people can only take so much of this, like you said, and maybe it is time for a change. I mean, if that's what happens, it may be best thing right now just to clean house from top to bottom. I mean, a lot of people are also fed up with the youngsters, but this is even worse right now. What's going on with this because nothing was said initially when the whole thing happened. Now this came out this past weekend. It just keeps piling on top of each other for him, and it's just getting worse and worse. And I don't know where to go from this, but with the ultras coming out, it's going to get crazy now because I mean the fans are going to really start. I'm curious to see what the next few weeks holds, especially when the last game plays. What happens? I'm sure something's going to happen. I don't know what, but something's going to happen. The early part of the summer.
It'd be one thing if we were all kind of going through this together and there was a real sense of unity, but I feel like a lot of people feel as though many of the people in the leadership positions of this club are very much out of touch with the actual members of their club. I mean, just the way they handled, the refunds on the ticketing and all that kind of stuff. When this came out, I feel as though a lot of supporters feel that the people that are in charge of the club are more outsiders at this point than actual fellow members of that community. And right. I think that's part of the frustration too. They just want people in leadership positions that are believe in transparency and believe in including the members of the club and the supporters of the club in the solutions for it.
Our buddy Joseph says we should bring back Tedesco. Are you for it or against it?
I know there's a lot of members on Schalke Twitter that are for it.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to pass on that one, man.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I could say, the only thing he could help right now is defensively, maybe. But we saw how that ended it too. At
the end of his tenure, though, we were even worse defensively than we were right now. I mean, I know we hadn't had the unbeaten run. The winless run, I should say, that we've had under David Wagner. But I mean, some of those performances against Mainz and Düsseldorf in the latter part of Tedesco's reign were capitulations unlike anything I've ever seen from this team. Even more so than this Wolfsburg match that you just saw, like the Dortmund, the derby in the second half. I appreciated Tedesco.
I still like Tedesco, but I
like him as a person. And I think he understood the values of the club and cared about it and cared about the supporters.
Yeah.
And I think he felt things very deeply. And so I think that's why many Schalke supporters look to him and feel fondly about him. But I don't think tactically he was much of, an improvement over what we have right now. I mean, so much of his reign was just marked by absolute incoherence on the pitch. I mean, watching it, you had no idea what the actual goal of any build-up play was or anything. It was that bad. So,
no, it definitely was, and I think just it's either keep Wagner or go somewhere else. As much as I really like Tedesco and some of the old past managers that we had. Eventually, we need to get out of this cycle of just keep replacing our managers. I saw a comment about 18 years now, in fact 18 different managers, something crazy since 2001, since Hoops even first left us. So we've gone through a lot. And you even mentioned, I think, the last podcast, that even when we were winning, we're going through managers, and it doesn't help now the fact that we're going through such rough times. We're cycling through 1-2 managers a season at the moment, and it's hard. Really, it is. And
that's why the David Wagner question is so difficult for me, because in some sense, we have to stop this coaching carousel at some point. And I understand that in football that there's more turnover at that position than there are in a lot of other sports. Just kind of the way the sport is. It's more of a results-driven business than almost any other sport. It seems like, in terms of the short leash that a lot of managers are given. But at the same time, it's like, teams like Leipzig seem to be able to kind of get away with it. Teams like Dortmund have performed better than we have over the past few years post-Klopp, where they've been going through managers at a fairly regular pace, but for some reason it just doesn't work with us. It feels like for us to steady the ship and kind of start building back towards we want to be, we have to have some sort of continuity season to season at the managerial position. And maybe we don't, but I mean, the way we're doing it right now is not working for us. And the fact that we can't seem to get past like a season and a half really of one person in charge, it's just so hard to gain any momentum and build anything off the back of that when there's that much change happening that quickly.
Bring back Ranić. No, I'm just kidding. Jake says, given our ineffectiveness at the striker position, how would you feel about a change to a single striker formation to bring on another midfielder for next season? I think I'm assuming, I'm going to guess for you, but I'm going to guess the answer is yes. And because 4-5-1, you can do 4-2-3-1. You still have 5 midfielders there. We do need a striker, though, because Bergstaller and Katucha is really more of a 10 type player or a shadow player. He's not a out-and-out striker. Gregoritsch is obviously not cutting it, and so we have really no striker. We need to go out and get one. But I would not be against it, Jack, and I think you wouldn't be against it, but you tell us.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you in the sense that it does seem as though Katucha might fill sort of like the second striker role a bit better than, kind of the out-and-out man up top. Although what I would say in counter to that is I would like to see him get an opportunity to play and start games with Suat Serdar and Amina Harit, playing behind him, because so many times when those guys were on the pitch early in the season is when we were seeing either none of Katucha or the late Katucha cameos where the game's kind of over by the time he gets in and it's hard for him to really affect the play. I'd like to see what he looks like, as a lone striker with those kind of midfield players providing him better service behind him. That being said, I obviously think we need to bring in another attacking player, and it would certainly not be a bad idea to go for, I think, the kind of player that some people are suggesting right now, the out and out striker that can really get it done for you in front of goal. Because it does seem that Katucha can be a little bit more valuable dropping slightly deeper and combining for sure. I don't disagree.
And Jay continued on saying, our midfield has been a productive part of the team, and so it would make sense to change formation to highlight and utilize the areas of the team even more. And I agree with that. But let's look at who would be the starting midfielders. No questions asked. Harit, right?
Yeah.
Serdar. Mascarell.
Probably.
Stambouli, if he's here. I don't know if he's gonna be here. So McKennie.
I think it has to be McKennie now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think I don't think he was as bad as a lot of people thought he was when they thought he was playing badly. And I've defended him in a lot of ways throughout the entire season, but now, especially the last couple games, I think he's showing some maturity and some growth. And do you really want Stambouli instead of McKennie at this point? I know some people they do. I think McKennie offers you more. Yeah. And can do more for you on the pitch than a player like Stambouli, who's slightly more limited and one-dimensional.
Speaking of Stambouli, his leadership on the sidelines is bigger than anything we saw on the pitch.
But, I love that. Seriously, he's been great.
But I guess the fifth midfielder would be Katucha at that point, if you want to put him as a midfielder, an attacking midfielder. I guess you could put Rahman in there as well, maybe as a winger. I mean, the fifth one I think is up for grabs. Because I think the other four are pretty locked in solid. Alexander Schoff, he hasn't really done much for us. I do think he has a technical ability to provide offensively, but he's not a holding midfielder. We've seen that many times, and he's not consistent enough offensively. So he's not going to get a slot. Caligiuri, when he's on, but if the rumors are true that he's going, you need to fill that spot. Whether it's McKennie or whomever on the right hand side, maybe a Katucha. I think that's where he has opportunity to come in and bring. If you can bring in a striker, but Joseph brought up the point that we can't bring in a striker. We don't have any money.
Yeah, that's going to be the big problem this entire offseason is I think the squad is in a position where more than any year in recent memory, it needs serious overhaul. And it's unfortunately coinciding in a period of time where we are less able to accomplish that financially than we have been in recent memory. So it's a very unfortunate confluence of events here that are making out for what seems to be a not particularly promising next season, unfortunately.
So next question we got, this is from Facebook. It says, what's going on with Tonnies? And so if you missed that part, basically, 3 months ago or in August, he had that whole racism row. He kind of gave himself a self hiatus for 3 months to get out of the limelight. Came back, kept quiet. No one at Schalke said anything at him, no discipline towards him. And then recently, this past week, his meat processing plant that he owns, a meat slaughterhouse, had a huge outbreak of COVID-19, of coronavirus. It way surpassed the German threshold, which they deem satisfactory, and then he came out just one thing after another with Tonnies, and people have had enough. The ultras had enough with it too, and they came out with a very strong statement. And we're going to reshare that link after this podcast. So that's a little roundup about him. The next part he asked was he missed the game, but it looks like we didn't miss much. What went wrong? We showed up. That's what went wrong. And we're setting records, all the wrong records. And I agree. Yeah, we're Jack. What is it? 12 games winless now.
15.
13.
15.
15. Oh my gosh, it just keeps going.
And we played 16 of 17 games in the Rückrunde, right? And we haven't won a game since the Bundesliga game since the Gladbach game to start it off. It's 15 games winless.
And we got Freiburg last game.
And that's the thing is, like, going back to Wagner briefly, like, as much as I would like to stop the coaching carousel and try to build some continuity, and as much as I don't root for anybody to lose their job or their livelihood, because at the end of the day, all these managers, these are people, right? I don't root for somebody to be fired, but what serious club, and forget, European aspiring club, what serious club of any level goes on a 15-game winless streak and doesn't part ways with their manager?
Right.
And what kind of message does that send if they retain him? Like that's okay? And that's like where we are now as a team? I mean, like, yeah. I understand the injuries that he's had to deal with, but it hasn't been good enough.
And we're stuck between a rock and a hard place between that. Yeah, it should be fired, but then we're like, we've had our carousel for years and we need to stop that. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And the last part he said was, are you guys excited for the season to end? He is, and a return to Schalke reform. Yeah, I can't wait for this thing to be over. We're not going to hit our 100th episode this season, but we'll have some good stuff coming in the new season. We're hoping to have two good bits of news this podcast. We're only going to have one, which is welcome to our YouTube page. We'll release the other one very soon. Believe me, that'll be the best news we've had from Schalke all year round. So we asked the questions. Send us questions on Twitter, and we got a boatload of them. If my phone will work, I can pull them up here. All right, starting with from Leo. He says, talk about the new lads in the Knappenschmiede, please. We need to dedicate an episode to this, and we're going to try to do this a little bit later on. Maybe right after the season ends, we want to bring in somebody who knows what they're talking about the Knappenschmiede, because we don't want, if we try to talk out of our ass, it's just going to make us look bad, and we don't want to do that. We want to give the Knappenschmiede their due, and so we're going to dedicate a podcast to that. Believe me, but they did just sign an Irish goalkeeper, I believe it was, Jack. I know he's British. I know he's from the island over there, but I think he was Irish. Do you remember?
Yeah, that sounds correct. We got to get Aiden on the podcast. AR Dayan.
Yeah. Yes.
Just because he's very good at the scouting side of things, and he's also something of a specialist at the goalkeeper position on top of that, which is obviously a great position of great need for us at the moment. So I'll see if he's available. We'll try to get him on. He would be a great guy to have go over some of those things for sure.
Schalke Canada. Hey guys. They said Jonathan David's camp, and he's a Canadian, would like to see him playing the Bundesliga. Could a move to Schalke be possible?
No, it's not possible.
We don't have the money for it. It's gonna. I was to Manu Veth, I guess, talking about it on Canadian radio, and he was saying, it's gonna cost whoever wants him 25 mil to 35 million euros to acquire him. We do not have that unless we sold Harit or something.
Exactly. So unless right at the start of this transfer window, we sell Harit, we sell a McKennie or a Serdar, or one of our midfield players that we think we could potentially fill in with one of these younger guys that we've been seeing come through, Bozdogan, Beaujolais, etc. Unless we make that kind of a move to try to free up some money, with which to bring him in. I just don't see why it's happening. With everything we're talking about, there's no way we can afford him right now. And it's unfortunate because I like that player a lot. And I would love to see him in Royal Blue. And I would very much like to not see him go to a Gladbach, or one of our competitors. I mean, it's hard to even call them competitors at this point because we're not really in the same spot of the table as these guys. If his people want him to go to the Bundesliga, which you can't blame them for, because it's a great league for young players. It's hard to imagine that he would, in the first place, even want to go to Schalke at the moment. I mean, it's such. I mean, as a manager or a young player, why would you want to come here?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and so that combined with the money thing, I just don't think it's possible. But that's unfortunate because I really like him and I think he could make an impact.
Yeah, I remember doing my little scouting, and when I say scouting, I just mean looking at YouTube, watching videos of him, and I was very impressed with him, and I know Alphonso Davies is talking him up really well too, so I was excited, but it's not someone we can even remotely think that we can get because he's going to cost way too much, and we just don't have the money for it. So
you're watching Jonathan David goals and skills highlight comps with bad techno music on YouTube.
That's right. That's right. Created by Alphonso Davies. Next question comes from Brad Denny. He says, what are your top 3 things for fans to feel good about heading into next season? Man, that's a tough one. We'll be back.
Yeah. 3 things.
3 things.
Hard to find 3.
Combine.
On the heels of what we were just discussing, I would say one of those 3 things is that if you had a club like Schalke that is in the kind of financial trouble that they're in, that is unable to or unlikely to be able to go out into the transfer market to strengthen the squad. As far as clubs that could be in that situation go, Schalke's in a pretty good situation themselves because of the strength of their youth system and the strength of the Kappenschmiede. If they were a club that didn't develop talent the way that Schalke does, it might be a more difficult prospect. And I still expect next season to be, very, very rough, and we need to be very careful with how we approach it. But, the number of young guys that we have that we feel could make an impact it puts us in a better position than some clubs who maybe wouldn't have those resources or, players of that caliber to call up. So that would be one thing.
I'm going to feed off of that for the second thing, and I'm going to say in Jochen Schneider, we trust. I think the mistakes we made in the past of letting the youngsters go for free, I think, are long gone. We've seen that with the extensions of McKinney and Serder and some other guys. I don't think he's going to let them go for free like the predecessors were. So I think in that respect, he's going to do much better than what we've had before. But I also think he does have a game plan on getting the team better. It just, the finances are hurting at the moment. His chairman is not helping things. But I think Jochen Schneider is going to be able to lock down some of these youngsters, and at least, if we're going to lose them, at least lose them for some money. I hate to lose these guys for free because that was just a bane of our existence for how many years?
I am concerned about Jochen Schneider backing David Wagner because David Wagner was his hire. Because keep in mind, Jochen Schneider fired Tedesco, who is very much a fan favorite.
Yeah.
And ultimately replaced him with David Wagner, who you have to say has not fared any better on the balance of the 2 seasons that Tedesco had, the season and a half that Tedesco had overall. You'd have to admit that Tedesco was better in terms of the table position.
For sure.
Football was always enjoyable to watch and often wasn't. But so I'm concerned that Schneider is maybe not seeing things as clearly as he would potentially like to, because he's worried about how this hire is going to reflect on him if he changes course. I mean, I think he had some sort of quote earlier in the week where he said, well, if David Wagner has good players, then the football is also going to be good. And that to me was such a ridiculous comment. Like, yeah, give anybody good players and they're probably going to have decent football. And then secondarily, when we all know we can't afford to bring new people in, you're almost unintentionally making the case for Wagner's removal. You know what I'm saying? If you're saying, well, if only he had good players, he could have good football. You're basically saying that he's not playing good football because he doesn't have good players. Well, or how are we going to be able to improve the squad this offseason?
Right.
We're not. So then why are we sticking with David Wagner? Jochen Schneider, I think, needs to try to stay away from the microphone as much as possible and just work behind the scenes and try to get us good deals, because I think that's what he's capable of. I don't really need him to be a spokesperson for the club or be weighing in on those sort of things.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have a third thing?
I guess the only thing I would say, and this is going to be sappy, is that it just – as bad as things are right now, it does feel as though the fan base is very united.
Yes.
and in agreement on the values and the vision and the things that we'd like to see in terms of transparency and change. And so, as long as those things remain the same, there's still kind of hope for the club, right? Because the club is more than the people on the pitch, and it's more than the people in the front office. It's all the members that make it up. And as long as they're united and still not apathetic to what's happening, I think that's a positive and something to kind of keep in the bank.
Yeah, no, I'm with that. I agree. I think there is a movement going on here, not to play off what's actually really happening in real life, but I do think that if the fan base is united and, with the latest stuff that's happening with the chairman and stuff, I think they're going to try to make something happen, by hook or by crook. And so, let's see what happens. And maybe something, hopefully something for the good, something for the better. Before we get to the next question here on YouTube is, we shouldn't give the EV status and sell out to industry money, the 50+1 rule stuff, even though industry might give us more money. Example, Hoffenheim and RB Leipzig. It's not traditional. And I agree with that. I mean, as long as we're stay competitive, I think we can. We just got to have a reformation somehow, some way, all with keeping the EV status. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think the whole 50+1 conversation is an interesting one, on that sort of a macro league-wide sense. But the supporters that would rather struggle and feel like in so doing they're maintaining the soul of the club as opposed to selling out, it's hard to disagree with that. So I respect that stance for sure.
The next question actually comes off something we were talking about a little bit earlier. It says, this comes from Chris Hughes. He says, will the fan base accept the Knappen-Schmiede youth revolution next season, which would likely result in relegation risk in the short term, but could pay off big in the long term? So if we do play Knappen-Schmiede, which we're kind of hoping for because there's nothing else, how else are we going to improve the team, right?
Yeah.
We play the youngsters. But there is going to be a risk, potentially that we're going to have another struggling season and potentially risk relegation. But ultimately, in the long run, would be better. Would the fans accept going into the Zweite Bundesliga just to come back stronger? That's hard. You got to remember, Zweite Bundesliga is a difficult league. It is a difficult league. Just because it's in a lower division doesn't mean it's any easier. It's the same thing with the Championship in England and many second divisions around Europe. They are still very good. You got teams trying to fight tooth and nail, trying to get up to promotion, and it's hard. And you have to be on your game for how many games it is. And so, as much as I think it would be good to play Knappen-Schmiede for sure, I don't know if I want to risk relegation because I don't think it's going to be easy at all, especially if you play with the youngsters to come back the very next season. It'd probably take a few seasons, honestly.
I'm just not convinced that it's much of a choice at all. I don't think we're in a position where it's, should we pursue that course of action despite it being potentially riskier. I question whether or not we even have that option. If the financial situation that the club has proclaimed that we're in is accurate, that's kind of all we have. So hopefully we can find a manager if we move on from Wagner that can see us through that. And even if it is bad, hopefully we can avoid relegation because anyone who's suggesting like, hey, would it be good for us to just kind of drop down and then rebuild? This isn't like a closed system where you're the Cubs and you sell off all these people, you rebuild draft and this kind of stuff and you build a championship team. The amount of revenue you lose from doing that, and I do think people underestimate how difficult the Zweite Bundesliga is, as you said. This is not. There is no guarantee that even for a team like Schalke, there is no guarantee that if you drop down, you just bounce right back up right away. It's difficult to accomplish that. And so, I think that would be absolutely disastrous for the team. And that's something I would never like to see happen. I don't view that as a potential solution at all in any way.
I want to look at something real quick. I want to look at the standings of the Zweite Bundesliga at the moment, just to give people. So people thought Hamburg would be an easy comeback up to into the Bundesliga. They currently sit in 4th position, and they are 11 points behind first place Arminia Bielefeld. Of course, Arminia is having a fantastic season. But you got Stuttgart, Heidenheim, Darmstadt's in the mix, Bochum, Hanover. There's a lot of
Heidenheim. That's the story, right? That's crazy.
Well, that is a story. But there's a lot of former Bundesliga clubs in there that are still trying to get back to the Bundesliga. It's difficult. There's some good teams down there. So there's no guarantee that we would come back, quickly if, within the next 5 years for all we know. So, it's hard. And shout out to our friend at Morocco and Casablanca. Hey, man, remember him? We haven't heard from him in a while. He says, do you think a rebuild despite the Bundesliga would be a good idea? And, it's the same question as the previous one. And not in despite the Bundesliga for me. I want to see the youth play for sure. We have no choice.
If anything, it'd be a disaster because we can't continue to pursue our transfer policy of stealing Nuremberg's attacking players. We're not just going to give them to us if we're competing in the same league as them.
Yeah, exactly.
So where are we going to get our play?
Schoff and Bergstaller and Teukert, right? Yeah. Oh, goodness. Oh man. Let's see. Holger Mesner says, after many years being a Schalke fan, I'm always shocked about one thing typically for Schalke. Really good players, some national players even sign with Schalke and never ever reach a Bundesliga level. Quality gets lost, but why? Why? I don't know. I mean, maybe they don't join the Mannschaft as the main starting 11 while they're with Schalke, but that's usually right when they get to that level, Bayern or somebody swoops in and buys them. Neuer was playing for the Mannschaft when he was with Schalke, right? But it hasn't been many, and it's mostly, I think, because our youth players, as they get good enough to be at that level, they get bought to a bigger club and we lose them for free.
Yeah, I mean, it's a question I think we'd all like to be able to answer is why the team performs the way it does at times, why some players that seem to be promising before they arrive ultimately don't prove to be so, why we can't seem to have a manager that can right the ship consistently, and it's constantly a change at the helm too. I mean, it seems to be this vicious cycle we're in as a club where we just can never gain any solid ground for a significant period of time, and it definitely seems to affect the confidence of coaches and players alike. It seems like people spending any amount of time at this club just takes a toll on people professionally.
Joseph says, we're being laughed at enough by the quote-unquote big clubs in Bundesliga. So if we go to fight the Bundesliga and get laughed at by them, that's just going to be a shot in the head right there. I want to go back to what the Ultras were talking about in their report. And they were talking about the finance aspect because, we're talking about money here. And they're saying, one of the big things I read that jumped out was that, the club who claims that they get 275 million euros in profit each year, we were in financial trouble, and part of it was like they weren't forthcoming at all about like what kind of troubles we're in. All of a sudden, we're a great profitable club, blah, 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 and all of a sudden we're in crisis. And like, how do you go from one extreme to the other? It just doesn't make sense. And this all adds up to not having money to buy players or re-strengthen our squad without selling players. And, the teams the players we want to build around, frankly, we can't build around them if we have to sell them off to, fill the rest of the squad. And it's a difficult situation that we're in. We got our question. Next question kind of builds off of that is from Senino de Oliveira Whitealdum. He says, who does the club build around next season, assuming we keep him? It's got to be Harit, Serdar, and McKinney, and Kabak.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a solid spine to the team.
Yeah, I was going to use that word spine from the top
to the front.
Yep.
Kabak.
I
mean, some people are going to be, Kabak and then, Harit, Serdar, all the way up to Katuchu.
Yep.
But it's sort of the players around there that I think we need to flesh out a little bit. Benito Rahman hasn't been bad, but he hasn't been the answer that certainly Schalke thought he was going to be. I wasn't really convinced in the first place when we signed him. It kind of struck me as another Marku type signing. And I think he's been better than that, significantly better than that, but I don't think he's been the answer. I don't think Robbie Matando is there yet.
Marcus been better at Cologne.
Didn't he miss 2 penalties in one game within the last month?
Yeah,
I'm just saying. Yeah, so I mean, I think you try to build around those guys. The few young players you have that have the goods and have the talent, and if at all possible, try to maintain those guys and somehow go from there. Because that's really all we have at the moment. There's not a whole lot else to hold on to.
This is an interesting question. The next one, and I agree 100% with what you're saying. I think we're both in agreement on that. Building with the spine and using them to build the rest of the team around. Our next question from Rob. He says, if fans were in the stands, would Wagner be fired by now? And if Wagner is sacked, is Niko Kovac a good option? So let's go to the first person. It's very possible he could be fired. I mean, I know the stance is so strong with saying give him a chance. There's been a lot of events that kind of. There was a confluence of events with him, and that's why it's let him continue on, and Schneider wants to save face. But we saw, last year, Tedesco, or, the Tedesco reign, he was a fan favorite, but the fans had enough at one point, and they're like, you got to go, Bo. I mean, we love you and all, but you were doing nothing on the pitch. You need to go. And I mean, it doesn't help that they lost, Dusseldorf and Mainz and get slaughtered by Man City. That didn't help anything. But, with the fans were in the crowd, it'd be more likely that he'd been fired or on the hot seat, but I don't think he'd be fired just because of the comments you made earlier in the podcast.
Yeah, it's tough. I definitely think, the fact that there aren't demonstrations happening potentially in the Nordkurve that maybe have been happening if there were fans there has potentially lessened some of the pressure on David Wagner because the team in some ways is operating in more of a bubble than they typically are. So they can just kind of do their own thing without some of the more direct feedback that they maybe would be getting on a weekly basis.
Would be a good option?
I like Kovac. I'd have to think about that over the next week.
I have to really see how
whether he's a fit for us. But I mean, certainly, I don't think his tenure at Bayern overly diminishes his stature at all. I mean, what he did with Frankfurt was very impressive. So I mean, that's a name, and if for some reason he was interested, I mean. If that's what you're interested in, is going for kind of a known quantity, he wouldn't be a bad option. But I'd have to give that some more thought as to whether or not I think that's a good move.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one. And then the last one, which is kind of what I was telling you about earlier, Holger commented again. He said, "It's starting to be the standard Schalke answer here, fan." Let me start that over. Started to give you the standard answer, Schalke fan, know him for years now, but there isn't a coach who can coach Schalke. Hoop Steven was the last coach to get the players to play as a team. 16 coaches since 2002 when Hoobs left. Hoob came to the rescue in 2018 for Schalke. Wagner is number 18 in 18 years now with managers. So that's where I got that number from. And he's right. I mean, but even in the good, Schalke was rotating managers. We thought we were Bayern, and if we're not winning a title, go ahead and change. I mean, Mirko Slomka is one of my favorite managers, and we lost him, and I was upset about that. But clearly, I'm so bitter about that. But we have all this constant have this rotation of managers, and it is the game of football, right? You're going to lose managers. You're not going to hang around that often. There's very few that hang around. Klopp hung around, I think, for 7 years with Mainz, I think it was, or maybe it was with Dortmund. But there's some managers that hang around a while, and others that don't. And so. I'd love to get out of that cycle, whether that means, holding on to longer and longer, or I don't know, but it's just it's a sad stat, especially now given how the climate of the club, to see this constant rotation throughout the management team.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to get at earlier, is that there are clubs that have been doing somewhat similar timelines in terms of managerial rotation to what we've been doing over the past couple of years, who have been more successful than we have while doing that. So in some sense, it's almost like you can't fully blame that on why we've sort of lost stature recently. But at the same time, it's hard to imagine that we would be any worse off for having some continuity over a period of time. So it definitely doesn't reflect well on us. And I think it also hurts your ability to attract a manager if they know they don't have a long life cycle. Maybe not the most attractive thing. Now, some of that can be tempered if Schalke is consistently a Champions League team, or if a manager feels like the squad is good enough to they can come in and they can be the difference to get Schalke where we need to be. But I don't think any manager is going to be looking at this club at the moment, looking at the squad, and being overly optimistic about what they have to work with. And then you combine that with the fact that they know they're probably not going to be around too long. It's hard to recruit people. We've kind of built a brand on that, and it's unfortunate. I mean, Roman Abramovich has the money to kind of paint over those cracks at Chelsea, right? You can bring managers in because you can constantly buy players and everything. It's not the situation that we're in at the moment. No,
it isn't at all. And so, it's gonna be curious what happens here over the summer. We got one game left at Freiburg, who are also in that European fight, I think. So it's not gonna be an easy game. But the sooner it's over, the better, I guess.
Christian Strike.
Christian Strike. There you go. That's a legend there.
Yep.
That's all I got for the questions, Jack. Anything else you want to throw in there?
No, I think 60 minutes is quite long enough to be talking about this team right now.
Yeah, I agree. On that note, if you haven't signed up for the U.S. newsletter, for the Schalke U.S. newsletter, just do so. Just enter your email address and you get the monthly. Definitely do that. And that'll wrap this one up. Keep tuning in each week as we bring you the latest from the Royal Blues. We want to thank Schalke, all our listeners for the questions, Andreas Ernst and the Ultras of Gelsenkirchen for providing us tidbits on the podcast today. If there are any topics you would like us to discuss, let us know and tweet us at SchalkeMerica. We want to give a good shout out to our dear friends at NBC4 Nashville. Jack, where can our followers find you on social media?
At JM Mangan, JMMangan on Twitter.
Very good. And as always, I'm your host, Richard Carmen. You can find me at R_KHARMAN. If you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the page here. And we'll catch you on the next episode. Tschüss.